So Jim, you thought a lot about virulence, which I think is something like how nasty a bacteria is, or how nasty a virus is that influences. What's the definition of virulence?
Well, that definition depends on who you asked, and there are clinical definitions of virulence, which is probably just how much morbidity there is, how much it knocks the patient down. There are mortality definitions of virulence. In evolution, virulence is usually equated with some impact on the host that could be mortality or affecting what we would call its
So I was taught in medical school that after a pathogen interacted with the host for a number of generations, it became more and more mild because there wasn't any point in killing off your host.
Yes, that goes back probably to before George Williams' time, and one of the purposes of his book, even though he didn't specifically address the topic, but his line of reasoning would have showed the fallacy in that argument.
It's not right, is it?
It's not right. It is the case that some of the nastiest pathogens we see are zoonoses. They're not endemic in the human population. They're coming in from outside. And there probably is a general trend that things that start out really nasty, the coevolutionary process leads to less nastiness. But that's probably
only because it benefits the pathogen, though.
I'd say it's more that the host, if you're killing a lot of the host species, that there's very strong selection to resist it. So a lot of that trend probably has more to do with host evolution than pathogen evolution. But there's no, it's hard to make a very general argument that if I'm a parasite, I should evolve not to kill my host unless there are very specific population properties that apply, right? That if I'm in a host and another pathogen just like me is in a host, and and let's say I have a mutation that makes me more benign, less likely to kill the host. If my competitor in the host is the one that kills it first and gets more of its offspring gets transmitted more than I do, then I lose out.
But the key is transmission.
The key is transmission.
And different routes of transmission seem to influence virulence. Paul Ewald emphasized this quite a lot.
Yes, and to be honest, I haven't kept up with that, and I don't know how much that's really held up.
The story has been that when an individual has to be up and around to transmit something that leads to selection for milder infections, while things that are transmitted by mosquitoes or needles or doctors' and nurses' hands, the more copies they make of themselves, the faster they spread, and that's it, even if the host dies.
And I think Dieter Ebert had a review paper that supported
the general idea?
Yes, the general idea of that. Mm-hmm. But there's also, when you start getting into the details of biology, it may be, so there's a time course of disease, right? And so the question is, when am I transmitting, let's say I got a viral infection. I had influenza 3 weeks ago. If I'm transmitting that virus maximally early in the infection, and I'm going to die of that infection when I'm done transmitting, it doesn't really harm the virus much at all. Right? If I get an infection, I transmit, my immune system comes up, and then let's say I get a secondary bacterial infection, there isn't much selection on the virus that I got to avoid that outcome.
So I've heard speculation that it might be possible for some pathogens to detect some other competing infection and to turn on more virulence factors in response to that because of the expectation that the host won't be around for very long. Is that plausible?
It's plausible, but so if a pathogen could detect that, you might show that natural selection could favor it. But the question, we don't know a lot about what the capability.
But no examples we have.
Well, I don't know offhand. There are certainly cases of parasites, macroparasites affecting insect species to make it change their behavior to make it more likely that the parasite gets transmitted. Those are very well documented.
Right.
So it's not entirely implausible that one type of virus or microbe could respond to something going on in the host that that would affect its long-term propagation. But I don't have any examples at the top of my head.
Interesting ideas.